All right, as she said, my name is Jade Fabello, and my presentation is American Poison, Life and Death in Pursuit of Social Progress. I, like so many people, have spent my life looking for a savior. Someone or something that could live up to the most commonly told story of the Western world. The story of the hero. It is a story where an uncompromising idealist relentlessly charges forth to some larger and grander end game. A person who shrugs off and ignores all sword swipes and bullet wounds in pursuit of their noble cause. And it is evident from the historical figures we celebrate and the dozen or so superhero films we watch each year that here in America, we are enamored with the sacrificial fight. But outside of the big screen, there are no super serums or Iron Man armors. Time and time again, in movement after movement, activist leaders find themselves occupying a single shared space, an early grave. The Western world has a culture that glorifies the suffering of marginalized groups. Additionally, the danger facing our activists and the politically inclined is not solely external. So even with our superheroes, since spears and bullets can't pierce their skin, the real danger to look out for comes from inwards, an internal poison. Which brings me to this. American Poison, Life and Death in the Pursuit of Social Progress. Now, activist work usually entails an attitude of selflessness. That selflessness, however, can at times be very dangerous. By looking at the relationship of activism and stress, the societal foundations of martyrdom, and additional dimensions that come with our changing world, we can hope to arrive at a better understanding of pursuing social progress without ignoring your mental health. In general, activism can provide a means to contextualize someone's personal experiences with discrimination and trauma. Joining with larger social movements opens the doors to validation, support, and resources to combat stress. In short, it is a coping mechanism to counter the mental poison that is oppression. Activism serves as the antidote. But there exists a great contradiction in activism. The relative bliss of social engagement can be followed by devastating ruptures that seem almost inherent to the pursuit. By nature, the practice usually means standing in opposition to the powerful. With that, there are some obvious risks. Activists can be targeted by government bodies for having the audacity of leading a movement. Unwarranted arrests occur, and throughout history, and in the modern day, there have been assassinations of those who have loudly campaigned for the rights of queer or trans or any persons of a number of identities. With those more expected risks acknowledged, in this discussion about mental health, we also must understand cases like with the late Erica Garner. Activists like her can and do die of chronic stress-related ailments like heart attacks. The intense pressures of fighting overwhelming odds can sow discord in the individual. And this is not just a problem for activist leaders. Anyone who even moderately wears the label of activist, or is at all inclined or in tune with the struggles of liberation, can be susceptible to this effect. While activism heals the mind on some levels, the coping mechanism can backfire, introducing all kinds of stress from increased burden, ranging from post-traumatic to chronic, which is particularly damning when you consider the top 6 causes of death in America are all related to chronic stress. Now, Garner had previously articulated that her actions, after her father, police brutality victim Eric Garner, was murdered, went beyond her own personal heartbreak. She had stated that her efforts were for her daughter and the next generation of African Americans. Garner joined a long line and narrative of marginalized individuals who paid the ultimate price for the selfless pursuit of a larger moral good. And of course, Garner wasn't the only one who received this reaction. Fellow activists and like-minded sympathizers grant a similar response to most any victim of oppression, activists or otherwise. And then, at least for a moment in time, the cause is galvanized around that figure, giving the deceased the status of martyr. The desire to impart this is incredibly understandable. If activism is, the act of granting martyrdom is then too a coping mechanism. Before passing on the battlefield for a cause bigger than themselves, every soldier wants to know the answer to the question, Was I useful? A more than reasonable question. But it is with this where we see America's peculiar relationship with martyrdom, which on its own is incredibly dangerous in the here and now. As Bob and Erickson said in 2007, in countries across the globe, leaders for social change are assassinated to derail their causes. If a leader upholds an ideology of martyrdom, or a movement operates in a society where martyrdom has deep cultural roots, the dead leader will more easily be converted into a martyr with mobilizing potential for the movement. It follows then that this is a self-sustaining cycle. The nobility of suffering begets others readily and eagerly taking up the mantle of more suffering. America's cultural roots with martyrdom have propagated a belief in the non-necessity of taking care of mental health. The U.S. has promoted a narrative that sees marginalized suffering as inevitable and admirable. That idea has always been with us. With the prevalence of Christianity in the Western world, the symbolic figure of Jesus Christ reaches on some level to most all aspects of culture. Prominent Western philosophers like Plato and Socrates, from their privileged place in society, long promoted the idea that while it isn't preferable, suffering is an intensely admirable state. Further, what the U.S. chooses to highlight in education accomplishes the same effect. The public memory of figures like Dr. King and others whose method of resistance employed not engaging in retaliatory violence. That memory simplifies the intensely calculated rhetorical act of sacrificing marginalized bodies and promotes it as the only proper or effective form of activism. Pouring through the culture and fiction, the virtue of self-sacrifice in America dominates storytelling too. And with these schemas of thought being the undercurrent of Western and American society, it would be incredibly easy for aspiring young activists to fully embrace the nobility of martyrdom. The culture suggests that if suffering for the marginalized is inevitable, then tending to mental health must be a fruitless effort, because this pain is unavoidable. The conversation about mental health is still in its relative infancy, as we as a society try to tackle the intersection of varying identities and peace of mind. It is essential to have an extensive toolkit. To put a name to a concept that we touched on earlier, identity fusion is the idea of placing or merging the individual with the larger group. Mentally, there is no separation. This idea is not restricted to identifiers that you belong to. You can fuse your identity with groups that you may not be a part of, through perceiving that others are being treated unjustly or that they have plights similar to yours. This is why many young people can identify with the situation in Palestine, despite not living that exact life. And without proper care, herein lies more potential for the degradation of personal mental health and stability. In this profoundly interconnected world, there is an unprecedented access to struggle across the globe. With the proliferation of footage of police brutality or missile bombardments, those with or without the privilege of living in a relatively quote-unquote safe environment can in some manner be exposed to a great quantity of suffering. Given this information, along with the discussion of activism and stress, individuals may now find themselves experiencing the stress and trauma of not only their own in-groups, but a multitude of groups that exist all over the world. When your identity is intrinsically tied to the well-being of the larger group, self-preservation no longer means self-care. It means tending to the needs of the whole. As a result, it is then more likely, more individually justifiable, to engage in actions that can be personally damaging, such as neglecting your own mental state. Further, since activism is itself a coping tool, that means it may be harder to realize that the antidote or medicine you are taking is also causing you adverse side effects. If hate crimes across the globe are up, across groups are up, which they are, then the daggers a person may feel in their side are multiplied. Exposures to videos of brutality and international suffering means that the one body you have, the one that is fused with any number of different identities across the world, that body can absorb incredible pain. The weight of every stabbing, kidnapping, shooting, or bombing. can decorate and adorn the soul. And since there are privileges afforded to people based on geography, psychologically you can justify that experience, the pain that you feel. When you provide understandable empathy to those subjugated under an oppressive state or victims to heinous practices like human trafficking, then the mental anguish you experience can be easily dismissed with the simple idea, well, I am not the one who is suffering the most from this. If I feel pain from simply being invested, then that is the least I can do. While there is some validity in that, since it would be naive to say that substantial progress can be made without hardship. That mentality is no excuse to recuse yourself from caring for your own mental stability. And now, finally, to take a step away from the at times impersonal world of academia, I offer this. In regards to activism, I think we need to be careful with our anger. Now, I don't say this because I think love is the end-all solution to all the problems of the world. In fact, I certainly don't think it is. The injustices I have named here, splitting apart of families by way of deportation or unrectified murder or occupation, it is more than fair to hate these things. To hate the unrelenting cruelty that faces those who want peace for their people or for themselves. This is not a conversation about efficacy of rhetoric, of catering to the sensitivities of people who deny you your own humanity. No, but rather to tamper the hatred you may hold. If not for them, for you. That recognition and hatred of violence can be honed into an energy that encompasses the fist as it delivers a blow to the wall of villainy that stands between where we are and where we want to be. However, the recoil of striking bricks sends shockwaves back to the core. When left unchecked, this action can sooner cause us to crumble before there is any visible damage to the institutions and systems we wish to topple. Sustainability is hard, but not seeking help for mental anguish because of a subscription to poisoning ideas about the nobility of martyrdom is even harder in the long term. I am not saying to not try to be heroes. I would never suggest that, especially when there are so many things and people that could use some saving right now. But ultimately, rather, we need to remember that sometimes even heroes need saving. Thank you.